Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're just going to wait one more minute here. Make sure everyone that signed up gets in okay before we get going. All right. Well, it's noon here, so I think let's get started and we'll wait for the rest of the participants to join in. My name is Darby Henshaw. I'm a planner and engagement specialist with B&A Studios. I'd like to thank you for joining us for another focused discussion session today as part of the City of Courtenay's OCP update engagement process. Today's topic will be growing and servicing complete communities. If you have any questions or have any issues with the Zoom functions as we proceed throughout the presentation today, please let us know using the chat feature below. One of us from the project team would be happy to help you out behind the scenes. Next slide. So we'd like to start today with a land acknowledgement. The City of Courtenay respectfully acknowledges that the lands to which this official community plan apply are on the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. In spirit of reconciliation, the City of Courtenay makes this land acknowledgement to raise awareness of ongoing Indigenous presence and land rights in the territory that includes and encompasses Courtenay. It invites us, a settler government and consultant group, to reflect on how we might be perpetuating colonial processes that are ongoing and from which we have benefited, as well as the changes we will make to honor the Indigenous peoples and their lands that we inhabit. So I've introduced myself, but I am joined by some lovely project team members. I'm joined by Nancy, the Manager of Community and Sustainability Planning with the City of Courtenay, as well as my colleague Adam Mattinson, a planner and lead of our Vancouver office for B&A Studios, and we're the consultant team helping the City of Courtenay on this project, the OCP project. Next slide. So for our session agenda, following this introduction and overview, we'll take some time to answer some interactive polls and then move into the meat and potatoes of the presentation. The presentation will include a brief overview of the official community plan update process and what to expect in the future as we move forward. For those who have attended previous sessions, including the June 16th session and the housing and livability sessions, as well as our last session yesterday on growing and servicing complete communities, this will be a bit of a refresh, but we'll move through it together. Then we will dive into some of our background analysis on Courtenay's capacity to support growth, which will then lead into our assessment of services and amenities. And then we'll move on to discussing how growth can occur efficiently and the tools that we can be leveraging to support that. Next slide. So really the purpose of this session overall is to provide an opportunity for you to learn more about the OCP update. So we'd like to share a status update on the analysis we've been completing on Courtenay's existing servicing and amenities capacity. And most importantly, we'd like to take time to create discussion and gather feedback from yourselves on Courtenay's approach to accommodating growth. So just a reminder to everyone as we move into the session that we will be providing many opportunities for participants to share their comments. And we really want to ensure that this is a safe place for everyone. So for that reason, we have a code of conduct for today's session. We'd like to follow this throughout the session, and it includes being respectful to all, being an active listener, and being inclusive. If you do have a comment or question that you'd like to share to us directly, please do so through the chat, anonymously or through email. We'd be happy to connect. Alrighty, so introducing our interactive polls. So to kick things off, I'll shortly be opening a poll question, which will appear on your screen. Please note that answering the polls is not required and is voluntary. So we just want to test out this polling function as we move forward. So I'm going to start this now. So I just launched it there. So next slide, please, Adam. So how did you hear about today's session? Select all that apply. So I attended the June 16th introduction session. Maybe you were part of the housing and livability information sessions. Maybe you heard of it by email, social media, social pinpoint, newspaper, word of mouth, or maybe something else. So we'll just take a second to allow everyone to get their answers in. All right. So it looks like some folks were part of the introduction session, heard about it by newspaper, social media, by email. This is great. Thank you so much for joining. All right, and we'll move on to poll number 2 now that we got the hang of it. And to help us understand where participants are joining from, please enter your postal code. So this is an optional item here. We just want to see where people from the city of Courtenay are joining us from, and this will be aggregated in for our data purposes and not shared to the public directly. So we'll just take a moment and wait for those folks that would like to answer to do so. Awesome. Okay, thank you so much. So we can go to the next slide here. Alrighty, so I'll now pass it off to Nancy to provide an overview of the official community plan update. If you have any questions again during the presentation, please reach out through the chat function and we'll facilitate behind the scenes. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Darby. Yeah, so I'll just talk a bit about what an OCP is, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Next slide. They are visionary public and community policy planning documents. They inform municipal spending, services, and capital projects, and they provide policies to evaluate new development applications. They get adopted as a bylaw by mayor and council, and they must adhere by a provincial statute called the Local Government Act. They are now required in BC as of the last couple of years, and they must include statements and maps on a number of topics. One is housing need that's forecasted for the next 20 years. They have to show commercial, industrial, institutional, agricultural, recreation, public utility land uses, public facilities, schools, parks, waste treatment, disposal sites. I'm actually reading directly from the legislation. The approximate location, phasing of any major roads, sewer, water systems, restrictions on the land that is subject to hazardous conditions or environmentally sensitive areas. They have to include that. They have to include targets and policies for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And where there's a regional growth strategy in place, they have to be consistent with that document as well, which we do have, Comox Valley Regional Growth Strategy. Next slide. The Courtenay's last OCP was updated in 2022 after a couple of years of analysis and public engagement. And that process was quite lengthy. One reason is because the previous OCP was adopted in 2005. So there was a long period there where the OCP was not reviewed in a major way. Needless to say, the city did not expect to be reviewing our OCP again right now, so soon after 2022 adoption. But we're now required to, as per provincial legislation that was introduced in late 2023. The legislation requires that local governments update their OCPs and zoning bylaws to pre-zone for 20 years of housing. And then it requires that this be done every 5 years. And so you're going to be hearing from us over at City Hall, or if you're in Comox Town or Cumberland Village, every 5 years as we update our housing needs reports and then revisit if our OCPs and zoning bylaws are meeting those needs. The province also created a few new land development regulatory tools. And one of those was they did require actually that all communities, nearly all communities, I should say, in BC pre-zone any of their traditional single residential neighborhood properties to allow for up to 4 units, or actually I should say a minimum of 4 units per lot. And that occurred last year in Courtenay's context. Now, given this focus on housing, this particular OCP update right now that Courtenay's undertaking is targeted to that legislation and the housing. But of course, the community is so much more than housing, and so we are spending time asking these questions around what makes a community complete as well. Next slide. Now, there are a few things that are new information since the 2022 OCP. We are learning that we are growing faster than we thought when we look, in the rearview mirror, and we're expecting to grow faster than we originally thought when we were doing that OCP back then. So new census data showed us that. We now have to plan over a longer time frame. Like I said, 20 years. The legislation before was for a 5-year housing requirement. And so all this means is that more homes, more people that we're expecting in our community out to 2041. An additional 8,350 approximate dwelling units look like they're required in that time frame. And just as a reference, we have about 13,000 dwelling units right now. Next slide. Now, there's a lot of things in the official community plan that are not changing. It is quite a lengthy document. For instance, the cardinal directions, the core values that guide the work: reconciliation, climate action, community well-being, and equity. Those remain. The core goals that are listed here in red on the right, those remain. And the vision it would remain as well. So that is, Courtenay is responsible for the future, supporting high quality of life with a low carbon footprint for all. The core land use concept, what goes where, is expected to remain the same as well. Maybe a little bit of tweaking along the edges. Maybe some parcels come in to become a town center or something like that. But we're not talking about creating whole new town centers that we haven't already seen. And we're actually not talking about boundary extension either. The only caveat I'll give to that is, as we're just looking again at the employment numbers and employment land base, potentially industrial land base, that is one question that's still in our mind: is could a boundary adjustment, city boundary expansion be required for those uses, but not to create a whole new town center. Next slide. So this is just showing we've structured this update into 3 phases. We're in the middle really of the project right now: the technical analysis behind the scenes, the policy review, and the public engagement. So this engagement is just wrapping up this phase of it right now with this session today. We've had a series of 6 sessions over the last month. And then we're going to move into having in-person sessions in the fall. And that will be, we're expecting, in the mid-October time. So once that's announced, just please pay attention to the website. And at that point, all the proposals for how to change the OCP will be presented at that time for the public to have some feedback on. And then we're moving into the bylaw adoption process into the fall. And yeah, the legislation requires that this all be reviewed by the end of the year. We are able to actually do the adoption into the new year in our particular context. So that deadline, you'll expect the public hearing in the new year. Next slide. So I'm going to shift to today's topic, complete communities, which is also not new in our OCP. This was actually contemplated quite a bit, but we want to just make sure we're revisiting it again with all of you. So the OCP defines complete communities as those wherein residents have easy access to a variety of amenities and services within their neighborhood. These include shops and restaurants, cultural and civic facilities, employment opportunities, recreational destinations, and more. This mix allows residents to live, work, shop, play, and learn close to home, ideally within 10-minute walk, which is, a lot of people are willing to walk 10 minutes to meet some of those needs. They might not want to walk farther than that. But this is why we often call this the concept of a 10-minute neighborhood as a policy objective that's actually in the OCP right now. Some mix of uses, such as heavy industrial with residential, are not proposed, however. So just to be clear, not all uses should be mixed with residential, but quite a few can be. The regional growth strategy directs the creation of complete communities within municipal town centers. And I'll also say that complete communities is part of Island Health's mandate as well, given the role that complete communities play in supporting healthy built environments that foster people's ability to walk and bike and have access to nature. And so all of that's important to physical and public health, that Island Health is always reminding and working with us on. Next slide. The components of a complete community extend beyond those particular land uses that I was talking about. They also include the effective, efficient servicing, water, sanitary, transportation, how you get around, all that housing that we need for our local people, and preservation of the rich natural heritage that gives Courtenay distinctive character and is a reason that a lot of people stay and move here, is something we hear over and over again. There's also, of course, the social dimension of inclusion and belonging, which is critically important to whether someone feels like they're part of a community and the completeness that comes with that. Next slide. Now, our official community plan urban framework growth concept, a little bit of a mouthful there. It is a land use strategy to support complete communities, and it identifies centers within the community that allow for a mix of uses already. And so you can see this was actually a core objective of the work back a couple of years ago. So shown in red, the two town centers, the lower Ryan Road area and the upper Ryan Road area, as well as the urban corridor along Cliff Avenue, are intended to be the primary focus areas of commercial and residential densities outside of the downtown. And then collectively, these areas will support a mix of uses that include a variety of higher density housing choices, taller buildings, some of our tallest would be in these areas, as well as regional retail destinations. And so these are called primary growth centers. Whereas the secondary growth centers shown in orange, these are the neighborhood centers that include smaller scale mixed use areas. They include smaller scale commercial and offices such as coffee shop, doctor's office, daycare center, as well as housing choices in buildings that are smaller than in the town center areas. The secondary growth locations include lands along the E&N railway corridor between 5th and 17th streets, around the Lake Trail Community School, around the Tin Town area. And then in the future, a new neighborhood center will be planned around the Anderton and Ryan Road area as well. And you can see that in orange on the right of the map. Next slide. So this slide just includes the text that I was stating in my previous slide, but it also shows, for some context, some of those other key uses that are accommodated within the city's boundaries. So you can see the urban residential designation comprises the majority of the city's land base. This is the traditional residential neighborhoods, and most properties within this designation were recently zoned to allow 4 dwelling units per lot, as I said before. That's, again, part of the provincial requirements. The service commercial areas shown in orange at the bottom of Ryan Road are in the floodplain where residential use is not supported. And then they're also at the top of Mission Hill where existing service commercial is existing. And so service commercial, we mean large format commercial uses, big box, things like that fall outside of the town centers. The light industrial is shown in purple. It's located primarily in the south of Courtenay. Heavy industrial uses such as sawmills or outdoor manufacturing facilities are actually not supported within Courtenay's boundaries as a future land use. And instead, given the size of our community being relatively small, the OCP emphasizes monitoring industrial and larger employment uses at a regional scale to ensure sufficient capacity to meet the needs of the regional economy. And that's, again, like I said, we are actually still looking at that for this work as well. The institutional uses such as education, places of worship, healthcare are shown in blue. The parks are shown in green. The agriculture is shown in beige, even the speckled beige. And then the lined hatching in the north and the southern boundaries are areas of future growth that would require specific local area plans to inform those uses in the future. So with that, that's quite a bit of context there to give you a sense of our current OCP, and I'll turn it now to the consulting team to begin to ask you guys some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nancy. That was a great overview. If you did have any questions about that content, if you would like to use the Q&A function below to ask our project team questions before we move on, that would be great. If not, we can move on, and there will be other opportunities to ask questions. So we can always do that then. So just wait a moment here and see if anybody has any questions that roll in. Okay, looks like we have one. So, Arden Elementary, if we could get maybe the map up again, Adam, that would be perfect.
Yeah, I can speak to this. I
Yeah.
think I have a sense maybe what the person is asking, and I think people, Darby, am I correct that if anybody did want to clarify with their own voice over the speaker, that's acceptable too? Okay,
For
yeah.
sure, yeah. If you would like to speak out loud, you can. You can just raise your hand and I can give you that functionality behind the scenes.
Okay, that's great. Well, I have a feeling this person is probably familiar with the regional growth strategy for our whole valley. And the area around the Arden Elementary School, so on the map, it's the, you know, the leftmost of that map. And I'm sorry, I can't control the map there, but that little keyhole where you see the blue. Thank you, Adam. So that's Arden Elementary. And those, you see there's a lot of white around that. And that just shows those lands are outside the city's boundaries. But those areas are called settlement expansion areas. And so the regional growth strategy has already designated that for when Courtenay is ready to expand our boundaries, that those areas from the regional growth perspective would be supported to come into the city's boundaries. So in this time around, we're not looking at extending those boundaries for the purposes of this particular update. But you're right, there will come a day in the future where the city of Courtenay is talking to the public about expanding boundaries in that area.
And just to remind everyone that the question there was around future growth and whether it was supposed to be around Arden Elementary area. Also put the question in the chat there, but for now we don't have, oh, actually we do have one more. So the question's asking, why did the Comox Valley end up on the provincial target list for keeping up with housing needs? How will Courtenay step up and what is needed the most?
Yeah.
Apartments? Single family lots?
Yeah. So so there's a couple questions there. So why was the Comox Valley on the provincial target list? So I can only speak to the Courtenay situation. We understand that the province is intending to add approximately 10 communities per year to that list. And I don't know at what point they've, you know, kind of accessed all the communities in the province. There's, how many is there? It's like 160 or something. So in any event, we asked that same question to the provincial staff and they just let us know that we're an area of high growth, we're a desirable place to live, and that we're in group 4 of them adding communities to their target list. So, okay, so we're on the list. Now, what it means is we're waiting to have the official target order actually given to us from the minister, and there was a ministry change, cabinet shuffle there. So we'll just, you know, see when that order comes, but there has been some discussions with the ministry on that. What we do know is that the housing targets will fall within within the housing needs that are already identified for our community. So our housing needs report was conducted last August, or actually I should say it was approved last August. The housing target falls within that, and it's actually a lower number than what our housing needs show that we need. And so they set targets apparently with many communities just to help, I guess not to be punitive, is maybe what I'm trying to say there. So how will Courtenay step up and what is needed most? So what we use is to inform what kind of housing we're actually going to need is from the housing needs report. That remains a very important guide to determine that. The housing needs report talks a lot about what tenures are needed. So we know we still need more rental. I know there's a lot of rental out there that's been produced recently. We need more rental. It tells us what kind of bedroom compositions that we need. And it tells us that we really need some very, very, you know, we use the word deeply affordable housing. I mean, this is, you know, below market housing that's provided by the nonprofit sector or BC Housing, et cetera. So those are the types of projects that the city's going to have to work harder with partners on, particularly that really, really deeply affordable housing. And then in terms of what form, you know, should it be single residential, should it be apartments, etc. That's really, each community has the ability to determine that for themselves. The province is certainly encouraging compact forms of development. They want to see homes near transit and walking and biking and complete communities, which we're talking today. The legislation actually guides that. But overall, a community can decide what the right heights, the right massing, the right densities, the right forms of housing, and exactly where it can go is each community can decide that for themselves. And so, yeah, this is exactly some of what we're talking about in this process. And what I talked about in the previous slides is that a lot of those decisions were made in the last couple of years. And so we're just kind of tweaking what we've already did in the last couple of years.
Thank you so much, Nancy. We actually have a couple of questions that stem off of that and are to do with different types of housing, primarily affordable housing. So understanding that zoning changes impact long-term housing, how are we going to ensure that some of those, support low income and vulnerable populations and not are left without housing or affordability? So I know that you touched on that a little bit, but to kind of we have a couple questions about that. So what's the city's plan and objectives for affordable housing? But I also wanted to, before you answer, just mention that we did have a housing and livability session for the OCP update a few weeks ago that can actually be found as a recording on the social pinpoint page. So at the end of this session, I will provide you with a link to the social pinpoint page that please, you're welcome to see that as well and review that and ask our project team questions in addition to that, but we can definitely answer these questions here. I just wanted to link you guys to that resource, but yeah, Nancy, if you
Yeah,
can
thanks.
yeah.
Adam, I'm just wondering if you can remember all the tools that were on that helpful slide from last week, density bonusing, inclusionary zoning. Maybe if you want to list them. I
Actually,
appreciate it.
yeah, happy to talk about it though. Actually, we do talk about those tools a little bit later on in my part of the presentation. So
Okay.
if folks are okay with it, I actually might go through my slides to kind of tee up how this all mixes together and where those kind of fall into the equation here as we talk about what we have available at our disposal as it comes to different policies and methods the city has to ensure as part of a complete community. We talk about things like pipes and parks, police stations, and everything in between. But of course, we recognize that affordable housing is a key component because if we don't have people that can afford to live in the community, then what good of a community is it at the end of the day? So I think, Darby, I'll jump ahead here with the slides and I'll circle back to these questions if folks still would like to discuss them as well.
Yes.
And again, as Darby mentioned, we had actually two great sessions of the recordings here that actually dive into these subjects in much greater detail as well too. But in terms of what it means to grow right now, as Nancy alluded to, when it comes to any growing community, there are many questions about the implications of that growth in terms of what it will take to support that growth while maintaining the quality of life and characteristics that we love. Growth can add costs and impacts to the neighborhoods in and around where it occurs. And so we want to be sure that we're able to support that growth while also growing in an efficient and equitable manner. So that means having access to the services that you need while also ensuring that you can afford a place to live, whether it's renting or buying within the community for folks across the economic spectrum. I'm going to start here with infrastructure before we move on to some of the more softer issues at play in terms of physical infrastructure versus services. But when we talk about infrastructure to start, we often mean the basics. For example, clean water, wastewater systems and stormwater management systems, roads, sidewalks, parks, and trails. As part of our work with BNA and our project team that are supporting us, we've looked at where these systems are strong and where they need investment within the city of Courtenay in order to guide future development as part of this plan. As Nancy mentioned, the 2022 OCP already outlines a proactive direction and framework for how we can make the most of the infrastructure we have while also growing in a cost-effective manner. Growth will be concentrated in our primary and secondary growth areas, likely mainly driven by the downtown, key corridors, and neighborhood centers. These areas already have services and relatively good transit connections, making them the ideal place to welcome new homes and businesses. So these are some of the opportunities for the question that was asked before about the types of housing that we're looking at here. Would likely be able to accommodate some of the higher density forms of housing that would be a bit more transit served and have more accessible street networks to walk to and from where they need to go, both to get to work and access services and amenities. To support this planning analysis, Courtenay received a provincial grant to complete a complete community growth assessment, or CCGA. This work, which was completed in late 2024, helps our team to better understand our infrastructure capacity and community needs. This includes analysis that goes beyond traditional infrastructure to include many different dynamics, including the services that residents and businesses need on a daily basis and how they can access them. Now, our team is being supported by engineers at Appleton Martin, who supported the analysis that builds upon the previous work of the CCGA and other city studies. The maps shown here show where our water and sewer systems are already ready for growth and where upgrades may be needed to support new development. Courtenay's designated growth centers are outlined in black, and the load on our existing infrastructure is shown in a scale between green for good and red, showing notable capacity issues that will require further study before additional growth can be permitted. The city's water system, as shown on the left, has minimal capacity concerns at this time, while our sanitary infrastructure, shown on the right, has constraints that will require further investment, particularly towards the south of Courtenay. We also look closely at transportation, access to transit, sidewalks, bike lanes, and the road network as a whole. We want to make sure that people have options to get around safely and conveniently, whether they're walking, cycling, driving, or taking the bus. The map on the left shows access to the full range of transportation opportunities, with growth centers once again shown, this time in red for visibility, and the darker the blue, the better, the more diverse the transportation mobility options in that area. The map on the right shows access in terms of walking distance to existing bus stops, including consideration for future transit exchanges, which are a joint planning exercise and endeavor between the city and BC Transit. Similar analysis was also conducted for other forms of active transportation, including walkability, shown on the left, in terms of communities with sidewalk and path infrastructure for pedestrians to access. And access to cycling infrastructure is shown on the right, which shows how connected neighborhoods are to the city's existing network of bike lanes. Of course, this analysis would be remiss if it did not include consideration for vehicle traffic, which includes consideration for proximity to arterial roadways, which is shown on the left, and the density of the road network, which is shown on the right, and generally indicates how easily folks, regardless of their mode of transportation, can move through the community. This latter map is especially important in terms of understanding connectivity for both private vehicles and other forms of transportation for any type of need, whether it be to get to work, to see friends or family in other parts of the community, or access to daily needs that you need to get to, whether it's a doctor's appointment or getting to groceries. Of course, access to parks, natural areas, and other open spaces is another important measure of how well urban form is meeting the needs of its residents. And as part of the vision that's identified in the 2022 OCP, a very key consideration, very important to residents of Courtenay. Fortunately, within Courtenay, approximately 98% of residents are located within a 10-minute walk of a public park or natural area, as shown as part of this watershed analysis. But that doesn't mean that there aren't gaps that can be improved in terms of the delivery of new parks and open spaces through acquisition tools or the improvement of existing assets. And while access to parkland is important, we are also cognizant of the demand put on specific parks, specifically relative to the number of housing units nearby, which are shown here by the pink circles. The bigger the pink circle, the more residential units that are located in that area, i.e. more density. This is increasingly important as we begin to consider more dense forms of development, including housing types that may have smaller or even no private backyards or amenity space on their properties, meaning that these types of residents may rely on public parks to have access to green space and nature, which is incredibly important, especially as we've seen in this post-pandemic world where we maybe have taken some of those considerations for granted. Now, a common question we often hear when it comes to planning for growth is who pays for it. The good news is that infrastructure improvements to support growth are primarily funded through a tool called Development Cost Charges, or DCCs. These are fees paid by developers to help pay for the services needed for new homes and businesses. These DCCs can cover items ranging from schools and roads to pipes, parks, and police stations, and other facilities that support emergency services like firefighters and emergency EMS. Having a comprehensive plan for growth in the OCP helps the city to understand how these services will be needed and how much is fair to charge new development and newcomers to contribute towards these items, because we also recognize that as we add expectations for cost on new housing, that does also have a knock-on effect for the cost of housing that we bring forward at the same time too. And so a lot of this work is focused on finding a balance to making sure that what is being asked for is in line with what the community's expectation for the implications on their community and what is fair to ask people that are joining the community to come forward as well. So I'd like to take a quick moment here to pause for questions again, and just highlighting that there are going to be a few other tools we're going to talk about, including the affordable housing item moving forward. So specifically, if there's any questions related to the hard infrastructure items I've just discussed here, I'd be happy to provide any clarity. Otherwise, we'll have more opportunities for questions further on in the presentation. So if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them here.
So it looks like majority of them are regarding affordable housing at the moment, Adam. I'll just take a look. So we might be able to move on and then have more time to answer those after your next portion.
Sounds good. Yeah, affordable housing really is a key consideration for many folks in the community, and that was definitely highlighted in the complete communities growth assessment and the housing needs assessment report, which are both available on the city's website, and informed a lot of this work as well too. So I want to just let people know that this was a very key consideration for all of this work that we're doing too.
We actually do have two questions that came in.
Sure.
In regards to the traffic load from Ryan Road to 17th Street, people were just wondering if we could kind of go over that one more time and how is that low? I know we had a map there in terms of traffic volume and capacity.
So
From
mainly
Ryan to
the
17th.
Yeah, so mainly right now, the mapping shown here is the access to roadways. Now, I should actually stress, and I didn't mention it this time around, I did talk about last time when we had this presentation yesterday, but this is in terms of access to roadways. And we do recognize that this, when we talk about infrastructure, it goes beyond simply having access, it's also recognizing the stress that's put on that infrastructure by the number of people that are utilizing it. And so as our community grows, more and more people will rely on these roads. And so that's part of what the team at Apple Martin has been looking at as well too. And it's not shown this mapping, but we have done some analysis related to the demand put on our roads and our pipes across all of the elements that I just talked about here. And so that is being considered as part of that capital planning process that I mentioned in terms of where road upgrades may be needed. I know there's a lot of talk about potentially adding a third crossing that the community has been debating for a number of years here as well. And so they're looking at those features not only in terms of road capacity, but vulnerability to things like climate change, which are also a very key consideration. We also recognize that some roads in the community are low-lying in the floodplain that are very susceptible to environmental issues that could limit emergency services from reaching folks if something were to happen. And so these are all items that we are flagging as part of our review, as part of the OCP, to help the community plan for improvements as the community grows as well, to ensure that the infrastructure system we have is able to support that demand in a resilient manner moving forward as well.
Thanks, Adam. We also have a couple other questions here. One of them being, how are these changes impacting the current capital? Actually, before we go on to that, because the image is here right now, we do have a question about what 0.01 by meter squared.
Yeah, sorry, this is very inside baseball, but this is part of the analysis that they had as part of that complete community growth assessment. And so basically, this is the amount of linear roadway per square meter of space. So it's basically a ratio of how much road and path access you have through a community. Generally, the indicator here being that the more roads you have are generally a good indicator, particularly in that map on the right here, in terms of how we'll call it porous, but really it's how easy it is to move through a neighborhood in terms of its block pattern. We often see in many suburbs that were built through the 60s and 70s, they might end in things like cul-de-sacs, or they might loop around where they might not be easy to get through without having specific walkways or things like that that connect. So it can be a challenge for folks, especially if they're pedestrians or taking bikes or other forms of active transportation, but also traffic, to move through and access services. And so generally areas that are shown in darker blue have a higher amount of road and pathways, and it means that it's easier to travel through these communities in this case to access services. But we also recognize that sometimes folks may want to not have that lower. And so there are some areas that are less traffic heavy in this case too. And so that's kind of the balance that's shown in this map here. But thank you, great question.
Thanks, Adam. And moving on to the next question, how are these changes impacting the current capital infrastructure plans? I think Nancy might be able to comment on that one.
Yeah, so this question, a lot of people ask this, how are we doing land use planning and housing planning and infrastructure planning? How are we doing it all at the same time? Are the plans being updated? I'll share just the fact that the provincial legislation that came in late 2023, it's called proactive planning. It's that's kind of a shorthand they give for it, in addition to it being very focused on housing. And one kind of the objective of that is to make sure that now that us communities have to update housing needs reports every 5 years, we have to review our official community plans every 5 years in our zoning bylaws and pre-zone for those anticipated growth. If a community is growing, not all communities grow, but ours is projected to grow. And then this is what is expected of us local governments, is that we are continuously updating, revisiting our master servicing plans. So the water, the sewer, the drainage, the transportation, the parks and rec. And making sure then that they are generating information on gaps in our infrastructure. And then we would use that information to inform what are called development cost charges. And these are tools that are used to make sure that when new development's happening, it's charged a certain amount that covers some sort of improvement that's going to be needed somewhere in the system, in the sanitary or the water system, etc., maybe the park system. And then the other thing is that council puts into their financial plan the municipal component and contribution to that growth of that infrastructure as well. So there's all these things that are working together, and with the proactive planning direction from the province, the intention is that we are doing this very cyclically. And so again, like I said earlier, you'll see the City of Courtenay people coming out and talking to you at least every 5 years. And that kind of sequencing and ensuring we're doing all those things in those orders and that step, that's not something that's traditionally been done in smaller communities. I think I could say for a lot of small communities in BC, but that in the case of the City of Courtenay, but we're getting organized to be able to do that proactive planning so that we can answer questions better about, where is that infrastructure gap? We can have a solution to fixing it, so that then when someone wants to build, they have the capacity to do it, because we know there's a lot of deficiencies right now in our system from preventing some development in certain areas. So great question. It's yeah great and common question.
Thank you, Nancy. We'll take one more question and then we'll move on to our next section here. But we did have a question about the city's awareness of wildfires rather, and benzene contamination. Is that a consideration for the water systems at all, or any sort of contamination from wildfires?
Yeah, I'd say to answer that question, I'd really look to my colleagues at the regional district who are working on the water treatment for City of Courtenay being provided, our water source up from Comox Lake there. And indeed, there was a fire there, and hopefully, we don't have more of those. But they'd have their public health guidelines that they would be following and are regulated by. So it's not something that's this team can, I guess, answer specifically.
I will make a note of the question, and if we can get an answer for that, we can get back to you.
I think I will just note too, as you mentioned, there are several, historical deficiencies. And it was note here with polyethylene in the pipes. We've seen this in some, same thing with asbestos piping back in the day, that many of our sewer systems and infrastructure systems have been built out over many years, where we recognize that there are better systems and materials to be used moving forward. And so as part of the intensification of communities redevelopment, the new capital plan, circling back to the previous question as well, does allow the city the ability to, in some cases, upgrade those systems to address some of those issues. And so this is an opportunity for the city to have growth help support some of that remediation that might be moving forward. Though, as Nancy mentioned, I think the specifics of that question we will have to defer to the regional district. But thank you for the question.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. I think we can move on for now to the next section and answer more questions shortly.
Sounds great. Yeah. And again, thank you all for your questions. These have been great. So moving on from the more physical infrastructure elements into planning for some of the more service-oriented elements that make our communities livable. We'll jump into some of those now. So a big part of being a complete community means having your daily needs close to home, things like groceries, healthcare, parks, and schools. As a general concept, a complete community is when residents have access to most of their daily needs and services, including major transit service access within a 10-minute walk, or roughly what we would consider about 800 meters of walking distance to where they live. Now, the Complete Communities Growth Assessment helped us map where these amenities exist and where they might or where we might need more. These maps show access to specific services, and by understanding where gaps exist, we can better plan to bring needed services closer to where people live and plan to encourage residential growth in areas where people are already served. This has longstanding implications as well too for other choices that people may want to make in terms of things like whether or not they need to have 2 or more cars. Maybe they can be a 1-car household, or maybe for folks that maybe are not able to afford a car, that maybe need access to affordable housing, and recognizing how well serviced those areas are. So we can talk about equitable decisions at that point as well too. So for example, the current OCP already includes many land use policies that guide directives that speak to these soft elements. For example, coordination with the school district, SG71, and community development partners to identify and set aside new lands for schools is a key consideration as part of the plan that guides where land use is encouraging growth. Courtenay has the ability to apply areas through institutional uses that will be protected for these uses, but we can also develop policies for mixed use developments to accommodate things like childcare facilities close to where people live and where they work as well. And so we have policies, for example, in the OCP that speak to these, as well as land use mapping that enables what can go where, that helps to guide this kind of growth in a smart and holistic manner. The same goes for healthcare facilities and supporting services. While healthcare is a provincial function, the city works with the province through the regional health authority to coordinate where healthcare elements can be accommodated. We also recognize that employment land planning for institutional and mixed-use office and commercial spaces plays a vital role in accommodating a range of smaller supporting healthcare and specialist services, including sole practitioner offices. Like, for example, if you need to go and see a specialist or a massage therapist or anyone along the line here. And this kind of mapping has been completed, recognizing that a lot of this is kind of concentrated in those town centers as well as along the Cliff Road corridor already. And there may be opportunities to encourage this kind of growth in other areas across the community. Similar access to food and cultural services like libraries, community gardens, grocery stores, and public gathering spaces are all considered as part of this mapping as well. This means creating opportunities to walk to, for example, a corner store or a restaurant nearby, in addition to having the option to hop in your car or take transit to a Costco or a larger grocer if you want to. The same thing goes for being able to access a art center or a recreation center, and recognizing the importance those play in people's lives on a daily basis, whether it's taking your kids to, for example, soccer practice or hockey or dance, things like that. They're all key components in how we commute in our given day to support families or individual hobbies as well. Again, bringing this back to growth centers, we can see how each of these elements relate to where growth is encouraged in the OCP, which is outlined in red, and where these gaps exist. So this map shown here, again, the darker the green represents the composite of all of those elements, from healthcare to community services to schools and everything combined together. And so we can see, for example, in the area around the downtown and the Cliff Avenue corridor, some of the older areas of Courtenay on the south west side of the river there, but we do see some concentrated services, especially the Upper Ryan Road area. And so this gives us an idea where those services are concentrated and where we may want to encourage growth, and where we are already actively encouraging growth, and where we may want to also encourage the delivery of new services to fill gaps in other areas that may be underserved. Now, much like the delivery of physical infrastructure through DCCs, there are many tools available to Courtenay to ensure that growth contributes to the development of a complete community. Now, unlike DCCs, many of these other tools are actually new, having only been introduced by the province through new legislation in the last few years. So these include things like what are called amenity cost charges, or ACCs, which are function very much like like development cost charges, but are specifically focused on some of the more softer amenities, including public art and public improvements to the public realm. We also have formal rules for things like density bonusing, which is a series of policies that set expectations for community benefits that are given in exchange, provided by developers in exchange for increased development permissions up to a set amount in specific areas, and inclusionary zoning, which both of which can help to deliver affordable housing options in particular. And so we talked about these in particular as part of our last workshop as a condition of development, effectively either incentivizing or requiring developers to set aside a set amount of housing that would be provided at either deeply affordable or at least below market rates. And so there's a lot of work being done as part of the study that's looking at how those tools can be used to ensure that we're bringing forward amenities and affordable forms of housing across the range of housing need in specific areas. I do need to stress that these tools, as well as part of the legislation, they need to be tested for financial feasibility, recognizing that asking new development to provide below market rate housing, there are costs to bringing housing forward at the same time. So these tools need to be calibrated in a way such that development is still viable, that it returns a sufficient amount of investment to actually allow the development to go forward. And so that is something that our consulting team is assisting the city with as well, too, to understand where these tools can be used and how much can be asked as part of the development process. In addition to these tools, there are a suite of traditional tools that municipalities that have been able to use, including grants from upper levels of government, the use of property tax revenue, which applies to all residents, existing and new, as well as employers across the community, as well as private donations, which actually has been, if we look historically, a major contributor to a lot of the things that we love in our communities, including parks in the past, have often been through private donations, as well as public expropriation, which helps us acquire strategic lands in areas that maybe the market we have not been able to acquire through other means, though this is notably used quite sparingly. Now, all these tools, in addition to the new tools that are available to the community, help to contribute towards achieving that public need. And it's about identifying which tools work best and work where. And so that's part of the study that we're looking at here, alongside parallel studies that are being undertaken by the city with relation to the development of the downtown, which is a local area plan, and the development cost charge and ACC studies, which are going on in parallel to this as well, too. As we plan for growth, we are also guided by a wide range of policies and plans that go beyond the OCP too. And so I just want to recognize that there has been a lot of work done with a significant amount of public input already. Things like, for example, the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which was completed in 2019 and updated just recently. There's also a transportation plan, which speaks to many of the elements specific to the road and transit network, and which is actually going forward with a strategic update, which will be moving, starting, I believe, early next year and going on for the next through to 2027, I believe, is when it's scheduled to be completed, as well as the city's new strategic cultural plan, which speaks to a number of those kind of other soft services I spoke about before. These all help to ensure that growth is holistic, not just about housing, though that of course is important, but also about the quality of life for those people living in the community, both newcomers and those that are already here. To make this vision more local and detailed, we are working as well with a series of neighborhood-based plans. And some of these already exist in the community, for example, like the Arden Corridor Local Area Plan, which speaks to that area that was raised in the question, as well as that area to the southwest of Courtenay, and also some ongoing plans like the Downtown Vitalization Plan, which is going on in parallel to the OCP update. These types of plans help us fine-tune how growth will look and feel on the ground. So if the OCP, for example, is planning at a 10,000 foot in the air, top-down level, providing very high-level guidance, these local area plans are new tools that can be developed in the interim years between those updates that Nancy mentioned that will help us plan at a neighborhood level, understanding what growth actually looks like, where the parks will be located, what specific uses will be allowed, where maybe employment spaces and services will be encouraged. And so, as I mentioned, the downtown plan is currently underway, and there's a framework that we're going to be bringing forward to allow future plans that look at other strategic areas across the city. So, for example, one that's already identified as a next priority area in the current OCP is the air park along the Cliff Road area, which looks at both the air park itself and the commercial mixed-use area around it as well, to be encouraging growth of housing and services moving forward. And that will be a strategic priority for the community in the years to come after the adoption of the OCP. So with that said, I'm happy to hand it back to Darby, and we'll go into the next round of questions here.
Thank you so much, Adam. Yeah, so we're going to move on to poll 3. I'll put it up shortly. So the question is, which of the following daily needs are easily accessible from where you live? So we have a huge list here that's actually generated from the Complete Communities Growth Assessment. There may be others, including jobs and employment, etc., that might pertain to you, but just complete it to the best of your ability to select all that apply to yourself. So I'm just going to launch that now. So which of the following daily needs are easily accessible from where you live? We'll take some time to have everyone participate if they'd like to. So we have childcare, schools, library, grocery or convenience stores, health services, public transit, parks or community gardens, restaurants or cafes, community gathering spaces, arts and cultural spaces, local businesses and shops, and none of the above. Just give it a few more seconds, but I'm seeing a lot of people are easily accessible to grocery or convenience stores, many to public transit, community gardens, schools. Just give it one more second here. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. Let's take a look at our results here. So it looks like many of you are close to some grocery or convenience stores, public transit, parks and community gardens, maybe less close to community gathering spaces and arts and cultural spaces. So that's good to know. Okay, and then we'll move on to poll number 4, which is essentially the opposite of what we just asked. So which of the following daily needs are not easily accessible from where you live? And I'll launch the poll now so we can take a second. So what are not easily accessible from where you live? They're the same options there. And of course there could be more. Just take a moment and let everybody participate if they'd like to. Just a few more seconds here. If you'd like to get your answers in. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now. We'll share results. Alrighty, so it looks like some people aren't as easily accessible to childcare, to the library, some community gathering spaces and arts and cultural spaces. So it looks like there's lots of options here for improvement.
And it looks like it mirrors a lot of what we heard yesterday too, as well.
Yeah. Alrighty, thank you so much for joining in. All right, so we'll take a pause now and maybe answer some of those underlying questions that we've had in our question bank. Let's take a look here. So we do have a question regarding with a low supply of single family lots currently, how can housing affordability be maintained? Single family lots have gone from 225,000 to 475,000 between 2015 and 2025. Looking in the future, how can we ensure single family lots going into 2026 on are prioritized?
I think it's a good question. It's a challenging one when we talk about the balance of objectives that the OCP had set forward with the vision here, because single family detached housing it relies on land and service land particularly, and so there is land is unfortunately one thing that we can't create more of. Other than some of the expanded creature growth areas that were shown on that map previously, this map in the OCP is potential areas for residential growth or boundary area expansion of the community itself. There are very few opportunities for additional single family lots in the community. As Nancy mentioned in her introduction, one big thing that has changed in recent years is the introduction of that provincial legislation, which changes how much housing can be accommodated within all residential lots across the city, but specifically in those urban residential areas that are largely single detached right now, which is effectively allows anyone, should they want to, increase the number of units in their house up to 3 or 4 in most cases in Courtenay. That could take a number of different forms, including adding a secondary suite. They could duplex their house. They could add a carriage house or a combination of that mix to allow some forms of attainable housing within the lots they have. And so that's something that Courtenay and all communities across BC are required to do now. And so that has already been implemented. But the creation of new land for explicitly single detached houses, other than expanding the boundaries of the community, which means that we'd be taking up some or more of those environmentally sensitive areas or lands that are set aside for other uses, that we will likely have to look at affordable, more attainable housing options in different built forms, either through those small scale multi-unit housing options on those existing residential, or as more likely will be the case when we look at the development economics in Courtenay and many other places in the community, is we will probably have to look at different forms of maybe an apartment, townhome, and a mix of housing across the full spectrum here. It's not to say people won't be able to build single detached housing, but we just have to recognize in the broader spectrum of housing options that are available right now, that single detached will likely be the most expensive option in the toolbox available. And Nancy, I'm not sure if you have anything to add to that as well.
No, you said so much. I was just thinking one little piece to also mention about our small scale multi-unit housing zone. So that's the zone that's now been applied to all those urban residential traditional neighborhoods that again mostly had single residential detached homes in them, is that in addition to allowing 4 dwelling units per property, the zone actually also allows for subdivision of a lot of those lots. So the city looked at the parcel fabric, the kind of average size of lots out there in the community, and found that we could create a zone that has now 300 meters squared, so about 3,000 square feet minimum lot size, which means some larger parcels out there could subdivide. Now, someone might say, well, what about the existing home? It's, you know, it's right there. If the lot, particularly if it's a deeper lot, maybe there's an opportunity for even creating a panhandle lot that way, which the city traditionally has not been supporting in the last few decades, but has policy to support that form of subdivision too. So I guess I just wanted to acknowledge that sometimes subdivision can, we're so used to it kind of happening on the edges of town and new big subdivision neighborhoods, but subdivision can also happen within the existing neighborhoods as well with that new zone.
Thanks, Nancy and Adam. We actually got a question that stems off of this a bit, and I think you answered a little bit to do with it, but given the recent focus of development on multifamily development over the past 10 years, where does single family zone land fit in the future growth, as there are large land holdings within the city boundaries that could be rezoned in close proximity to city services?
I think I'll add one part about the new legislation on so small scale multi-unit housing, SSMUH. It's, you might hear us say even SHMU or small, quite an acronym. We actually, local governments in general terms cannot create zones that restrict to single residential use anymore. So anytime someone is now creating a subdivision that we might be kind of used to, you know, those traditional subdivisions, right? They're the new homes, there's a new park, there's not a lot of trees because they have to clear the lot. Those now, all us local governments have to allow 4 units per each lot. And like I said, we have a pretty small lot size. So I think just the very nature of new development, whether it's in the existing neighborhoods that I was already talking about, or if it's even on our boundaries, they will inherently have the ability to have more units. Developer or a home builder might decide to only put 1 in, but they will have to have the ability to put more. So I guess the main message I'm trying to say there is there's something fundamentally changing in BC about how we grow and that traditional way and character that we're used to in Courtenay. It will be changing over time. It will be more urban in the future.
Thank you, Nancy. Oh, yeah.
I think, yeah, if I can add to that too, we also want to keep in mind that like Courtenay is part of the broader region too, and so there may be communities further afield where that built form may be more affordable just based on the availability of land, assuming they have servicing right now. But a challenge we do have for the provincial mandate right now is to ensure that the city has enough land within its existing supply right now. And based on the analysis we're seeing right now and the direction for policy that the province has given us, it does look like the city will have sufficient supply to meet its housing need over the next 20 years without needing to expand its boundaries. And that covers the broad mix of housing choices, including single attached, though we are cognizant that there are not likely to be as many purely single attached development options brought forward in the near future, just based on a number of factors, including just the cost of land and the competition for it at this point right now. But great question. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Adam. I have a couple questions on those tools that we can use to create development. And so one of them is, how will development cost charges be kept low for nonprofits, given the significant social and economic value their projects provide? So that's one of them. And then we'll move on to the other one. You can answer that one first.
Great question. This is a really important one because we know that people that are organizations specifically, it's often a lot of nonprofits that are delivering this kind of housing as a partner to the community. And we did talk about this a fair bit at the last workshop, but these development cost charges, amenity cost charges, and all the other tools we're talking about, they can have an implication on whether or not those projects are actually possible to deliver or not, because they rely on a lower revenue stream as a result of being affordable relative to construction costs. And construction costs I know we've all experienced inflation over the last few years. We've seen the price of the groceries go up, but the stark reality is that construction costs have actually gone up quite a bit more than even what most of us have experienced in our daily lives, and it has a real implication on the delivery of housing. So it is a very real concern. And so to the question, municipalities do have the option to make strategic exemptions or mitigations for things like development cost charges. They also can't charge on specific affordable housing for amenity cost charges. So there are carve-outs that can encourage those kinds of uses. But one thing we do also need to keep in mind is that comes out of a capital plan, the way we develop development cost charges and amenity cost charges that are still supposed to be built at the same time. So if we're granting those exemptions, whether it's for any type of housing, that funding does need to be recovered in another form, whether that's increased property taxes or grants from other levels of government. So it's a bit of the balancing act that we have to find. And there's definitely a case for trying to encourage equitable forms of obtainable housing that, maybe we do ask other areas of our purse to pay for it in that case. But that's just something we want to be cognizant of in the conversation. But thank you for that question.
Thanks, Adam. And to follow up on that, there's another question about, will new builds be required to have a percentage of affordable housing within their building? And how will those affordable housing units be managed to ensure that those who truly need them are accessing them?
Yeah, another very relevant question as well too. And so that is a possibility that the city can look at. As I mentioned, that new tool legislatively enabled as part of recent changes by the province at the end of 2023. We can now pass a bylaw that would require either all development or specific forms of development or specific areas of new development moving forward, that the municipality can require a form of affordable housing, and the municipality can determine what that form is in terms of if it's rent geared to income, if it's below an average market rate at a set time. It's up to the municipality to determine what that looks like and what they're asking for. But as I mentioned previously, the challenge with this tool is that it has to, as part of the legislation, municipalities are required to demonstrate that the tool does not make development unviable. And given the increase in construction costs right now and the challenges bringing forward, we are seeing a lot of cases where this tool, historically has been applied in some markets, particularly very, very high growth markets where it's had some limited success. But the reality is that in many cases, it's the cost of providing affordable housing kind of as a blanket requirement can very easily make projects not viable anymore. And so there's a discussion in terms of the type of development, the density of development we're seeing in Courtenay as to whether or not it can support it. Our team is continuing to look into that, and we're hoping to report to council about what will work and what will not moving forward. But it is certainly something we are looking at, and we're hoping to provide answers moving forward. But thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I think given the time, we will move on to our discussion section of the presentation, and we'll try to answer most of these questions at the end or throughout the discussion. So moving on to our discussion, please use the raise hand function to share live to the group if you would like to, not required, but you can also use the Q&A or chat function to provide your responses. But moving on to discussion question number 1. What would make your community feel more complete or livable as it grows? Do you have examples of communities or places that do completeness well? So think about those recreational opportunities, access to parks and trails, civic and cultural facilities, transportation options, or places to gather. So I know we've been talking a lot about affordability and housing and where that's located. But in addition to that, what would make your community feel complete? What are those amenities and items that you would like to live nearby as daily needs? And feel free to put your hand up if you would like to speak directly and be part of that conversation. I can give you that functionality. I think one of the ones that we received previously a comment was about students and access to public transit. And I think maybe we can comment on that and the importance of accessing high schools and similar activities without necessarily having requiring a car or their parents to drive them. So we can maybe start with that one if Adam or Nancy, you want to jump in.
I can maybe jump in just because we work here as city staff with the school district staff. Admittedly, I think we could work more with them. But this is one area of shared goal that the school district has and the city of Courtenay has, is to talk about how and come up with action on how to help students get to where they need to go without having to rely on maybe a single occupancy vehicle, or them with their parents or something like that. So when we wrote the OCP in 2022, there are a series of key strategic implementation priorities, and one of them is developing more partnership, memorandums of understanding, things to cement in a working relationship with the school district in particular, and transportation was one of those ones right at the top of the list. So I guess I can say is those conversations are ongoing, and I wish I had my manager from transportation here on the call as well, because I know that he is working on some safe routes to schools work, etc. And so I'm afraid I don't have any details other than to just assure that those some of that is ongoing work program.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. I think something else that we also received was speaking about traffic load and traffic volume along Ryan Back Road, 17th, 5th Street, and those are likely being assessed as well. I mean, livability means access for cars and all sorts of transportation sources. So maybe you could comment on that as well about traffic volume. I know we touched on it in the presentation.
Yeah, that transportation strategic update that Adam mentioned, that's just being I think the tender just closed on it recently, and so then the project can open, start its process once those consultants are retained, and then that goes all through next year. And yeah, just really making sure that the transportation system is integrated now with these refined growth projections, these longer growth projections. So yeah, that point on signaling light, the timing of the signals, we'll just relay that to that team, and I'm quite confident that is in the scope of that work.
Yeah, it will be looking at that work, as my understanding, and it will also be looking at a number of other alternative forms too, kind of tying back to the previous question about active transportation. It's looking at the full suite of transportation options. So recognizing, cars are not going anywhere. They will still be a key component of how people get around Courtenay and the Comox Valley. but also at ways to alleviate challenges, including potentially giving folks to get out of their cars if they'd like to take that, including students. And actually, I was talking about this yesterday at the same at our workshop, but I think we are seeing incredible uptake from seniors as well, folks across all ages using electric bikes and scooters, and so providing safe access to infrastructure for them at the same time too are things that will all be considered as part of that in terms of a holistic review. And there will also be policies in the OCP that we're looking to ensure that reflect that at the same time too. So thank you for that question.
Thanks, Adam. We also have a hand up from Jackie here. So Jackie, I'm going to allow you to talk now and you can speak with the project team. Let me know if that works for you. You might have to unmute on your end first before speaking. There
Okay.
you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, we can. Hello.
Yeah. I have a problem with typing because I broke my wrist a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so it's better for me to speak to my concerns. My husband was born and grew up here, and so we visited the community over the years to visit his mother, and we could see the gradual change in the community. But when we retired, we chose this community because it still had that small town feeling. And my concern is that we keep the scale of our community to a reasonable level. And the first thing we can do is not build a whole bunch of buildings that are taller than, say, 4 stories. And you can see this downtown where where the theater used to be downtown, and now there's a 6-story, 5-story building there. As soon as you start doing that, you just change the whole perspective of the community. So I'd really like to suggest that when you're looking at more high density developments, you don't do the 6-story thing and make it, especially like around Harmston Park there. Could be a little canyon or it could be quite a lovely development. But I really do appreciate the way that the community is being developed. The other thing is, I live over near Puntledge Park, and this whole side of I don't know if you call it West Courtenay, but the 5th Street downtown area and everything, all for me, especially now I can't drive because of my hand, all the grocery stores and everything are way down the other end of town. And we just have that one little farm market place. And I am doing a lot of volunteer work with senior citizens, and I'm beginning to really realize how difficult it is for them to get around. A lady the other day told me that to get a handy dart, you have to book it 3 days ahead. So I think that's another thing. You can look at schools and communities and parks and that, but you really have to consider the large number of senior citizens who are settling or have lived for many years in the Comox Valley.
Yeah, thank you for that comment there, Jackie, about the senior citizens. We're actually getting a lot of comments that echo that accessibility and ensuring that services are close to where people live, especially for seniors. So I will let Nancy and Adam respond to your concerns.
Sure thing. Thanks, Darby, and thank you so much, Jackie, for the feedback there. I hope your wrist is healing up well here. I'm sorry to hear about that. To your point, yes, I think one thing we recognize coming here for this project, and I also want to say my in-laws actually live in Courtenay, so I'm there frequently as well too, and they echoed a lot of exactly what you said as well as their own concerns. So we recognize, there's something about Courtenay that everyone really goes to the valley to experience. It is that community feel, it's that access to nature, it's the level of development, and we recognize that we want to maintain that as much as we can through this plan. We also are looking to balance that with other challenges, that there is demand for housing. That's why we've seen costs increase so much, and so we're trying to find a balance point for folks across the spectrum, socioeconomically, age, incomes, that they can all find a place that are looking to be part of the community, whether they've been there for 20, 30 years, 40 years or more, or if they're just newcomers. I think one thing I can say is, as someone who's married into Courtenay, I'll say, there's it is a lovely place. It's incredibly, and I think the secret's gotten out. It's kind of like Squamish 10 years ago, in that it's become more and more people are aware of it, and there's a lot more people interested in moving to the community. And so it's trying to find a way to balance that. We are looking at built forms to your concern about what works where. And I think the intent is to try and find a way to encourage growth in a select few number of places that is respectful of what came before and is going to still maintain as much of that as possible. But we've definitely heard everything you've said, and we will look to do our best as we incorporate that into the feedback and consider it. So thank you so much for your comment.
Thank you so much, Jackie. We'll take one more and then we'll move on to our question number 2. Let's see here. Looks like attainable housing in terms of accessibility is definitely important. From an environmental perspective, with respect to municipal costs, we have a question about spending money on green spaces, such as gardens, European gardens, and instead maybe rewilding these areas with appropriate walkways and pathways. So the question is there any thought given to this enlightened perspective?
Yeah, I can answer that to the best of my familiarity with the Parks Department's current management practices. I know there have been efforts to remove some grass boulevards and put in some xeriscaping, some plants. Sometimes it is actually also gravel, but you know, particularly where those plants are being replaced, I think that's kind of a rewilding kind of scenario. I know our parks team is very committed to meeting our urban forestry tree planting targets on public land. They provided a report to council, it might have been January, February of this year. In any event, it was in Q1 of this year. And they had a very thoughtful approach and talked about where they've already done planting and where the next stages are. And given that planting large specimen trees, a lot of the area that they can do that in has already happened. Those trees might be small right now, but they need that room to grow. They're now turning their mind more to the understory and more that kind of shrubbery, native plants, etc. So there was definitely an intention there from the Parks Department. I guess one thing to just remember too is that the park areas are areas of competing use. So we do also need areas for the lawns for, you know, sports and other kind of picnicking, other kinds of other uses that people do. So city's always trying to balance and make sure that all those needs are being portioned for. So yeah, it's just some perspective to share there.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Nancy. Given the time, we have 10 more minutes left in our session, so I'd like to move on to question number 2, which are what are the barriers that may prevent you from accessing your daily needs? So examples are distance to services, lack of transit options, nearby services are too busy, etc. And we had a great comment from Kelly that we'll use as a jumping off point here in the chat. So she mentioned the lack of poor transit is putting an enormous amount of pressure on caregivers to support people to get around that, to have their basic needs met. Many of them are in their 80s. So she's asking, who is helping these caregivers when they need help, when they require medical treatment? Adam or Nancy, would you like to comment on that?
I can maybe just share that in terms of municipal services, our core role with regards to this topic would be in making sure that we're allowing land uses that can support maybe the caregiver to help get the person they're caring for to meet those daily needs. So for instance, allowing the mix of uses, allowing the doctor's office to be closer, allowing that park to be within walking distance, making sure we're zoning for and doing whatever we can to get affordable housing units as part of new developments. That those are all roles the local government can play in supporting that caregiver. Beyond that, it's yeah, I think there's many jurisdictions that have to work together, like senior governments, provincial government in particular, to assist in maybe answering that question in a more satisfactory way. But those are my thoughts just on how that land use component and local governments can assist.
Yeah, I think just to add to that too, I think we recognize that there are many people that you know, as was mentioned by a few folks in the conversation already, they love Courtenay and they want to stay here and they want to age in place as much as they can. And so, some folks may choose to do that in their house because they're comfortable there, and that's where they want to be. And as Nancy mentioned, there's ways that we can look from land use to potentially find ways to bring those services closer to them, where we're able to influence that. Again, municipalities have a limited number of levers that we can pull on this front. Some of this is largely within provincial or other levels of government in terms of their mandate, but we also do have options when it comes to that land use to also enable the kinds of development that maybe would allow those folks to, if they felt comfortable doing so, stay in the community and downsize to somewhere nearby that might be immediately integrated with many of those needs. We do have institutional uses for seniors and supportive living care. We are looking at opportunities that might be able to provide, very accessible apartments as well that are be very comfortable to age in place as well without having to leave the community. And so these are all options that are potentially would allow people to continue while also making it easier for caregivers to live in the community themselves, closer to where their clients are, and being able to serve them. But great question, thank you.
Thanks, Adam. We also have a question. Nancy was mentioning working with other jurisdictions or partnerships, and we did have, although this is maybe not daily needs, but some folks connecting to different communities in the surrounding area. And so, transportation in that respect, a regional approach to transportation and connectivity. So Nancy, I wonder if maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, the regional service, transit service is a regional service in our communities. So City of Courtenay participates in providing input into BC Transit's planning processes for transit services, and then the regional district as well plays an important role there. And the City of Courtenay, we'll always try to look for, can we get some more and more bus shelters, things like that, make sure that, when development comes along, we're supporting someone who's taking the bus. But in terms of actually understanding where the network of the routes will go and their frequency, that is a regional consideration. And one thing that will allow for transit to economically be provided more routes and more frequent service is increasing the residential and, well, I guess other uses as well, employment densities as well. So this is all where as we allow more density to occur and as it gets built, then BC Transit's watching there right in live time and looking at how they can improve the transit service. So that's kind of those chicken and egg. We work together to make the transit service better.
No, that's great. And we've also got some comments about alternative forms of transportation and adding into that, taking advantage of electric mobility options, including walking, running, bike, scooter, etc., and having those end of services or components. So that's a great comment. Looking at the time here, we are going to move on. We really appreciate all your questions today. They were great. There are opportunities I'll point to where you can ask more questions to the project team if you still have some. We can just go to the next slide. And yeah, so there are more opportunities to get involved. One being the social pinpoint page. The link is here and the QR code will give you access to the social pinpoint page. I'll also paste it in the chat here, just for people to have easy access to it. But that being said, you can sign up on that social pinpoint page for email updates as the project process moves on. We will have a future public open house in the fall. The details on that have yet to be determined, but we will update the project page and send out an email to inform everybody of that if you would like to participate. On the social pinpoint page, you will find an area where you can submit your questions to the project team and have them answered. Please do so if you would like some more clarity on anything that was presented today, or if you have any other questions in general about the OCP update process, we'd be happy to help you out. So that's it on my end. Nancy and Adam, do you have anything else to note?
Just really appreciate everybody coming out on a sunny day and listening, participating. Please tell your friends the recordings are available of the previous sessions. So a chance for more people to observe And then there's even some surveys that are posted online, and there'll be another survey on this topic posted as soon as we can get that up. It will be a few days from now, but yeah, the conversation continues. So please share the views, and then public session in person in the fall.
Thank you so much. We'll end the session there. We really appreciate you joining and hope to see you in the future. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, everyone.